Hey everyone, I have a quick message before we begin this episode. As you know, we record episodes well in advance and then they arrive and things have changed in our world and in our lives. So you are going to hear us say that Chelsea's podcast is called Celebrity Book Club. And it used to be, but now there has been a rebrand and Celebrity Book Club is now Glamorous Trash. It gave Chelsea the opportunity to not only talk about celebrity memoirs, but other pop culture entities that she is passionate about. All of the correct information will be in our show notes. Thanks and happy listening. Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. Today, it is one of those episodes where I'm going to be extremely excited and try to be cool, but fail at it, because my guest is Chelsea Devantis, host of the amazing podcast, Celebrity Book Club. You've heard Jules and I talk about it on Still Comfy. She is an Emmy-nominated TV writer, comedian, and filmmaker. She's written on some of my favorite shows, Girls 5 Eva, ABC's Not Dead Yet, and was Jon Stewart's head writer on The Problem with Jon Stewart on Apple TV+. And today she's going to help me perpetuate my stance that women's stories matter and don't get enough play. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
I'm honored to be a guest on this podcast. I have come to know you so well through mine, and so I feel like we're good friends.
We are good friends. I love that because now I don't have to tell you at the end that through the conversation, you are now my friend and stuck with me.
I love it. I already felt that way.
Oh, I think my favorite part of Celebrity Book Club is that it all started with Jessica Simpson.
Yeah, she really did inspire so much. And more than that, it started in a hot tub. I was on a girls trip. I was literally wearing a tiara that was like half caught in my hair. And I know that because my friends took a picture of me reading Jessica Simpson's book in the hot tub with a tiara. And everyone had gone to nap because it was a girls trip where like we were all, it took us 2 years to plan it because we were so busy. So everyone was also very tired. So people were napping. I was like, I gotta get into this book. And then I started putting it on my Instagram stories. And I had never before that moment even told people how obsessed I was with celebrity memoirs because it's a genre people look down upon. And I came up with the comedy world, which is like a boys club. And I never wanted to like out myself as like not being like cool. But yeah, I also, obviously, I think it's obvious to the story details, was drunk. And so I was like, I'm going to post and nobody's going to stop me. And literally the podcast launched 3 days later. And that was Valentine's Day 2020. And yes, I was on a girls trip for Valentine's Day.
As you always should be for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
We're very pro Galentines.
That's right. That's right.
I love that you just fully admitted, like, I didn't feel like it was cool enough to talk about celebrity memoirs, so they were my, like, dirty little secret, because that's how I operate my life, where I'm like, I play D&D because I'm not like the other girls or whatever, but I'm not going to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love how much it's changing now, where people are like, oh, that is ridiculous and unnecessary, and we don't need to hide this stuff because normcore culture in the 2000s bred some illogical idea into us that it wasn't valid to like the things you like.
Yeah, and I was listening to your Fergie episode this morning, and you were talking about how, or your guest was talking about how you went on their podcast about self-help trends and wellness trends, and it was about how celebrity memoirs get partnered with self-help so often, and in my mind, both of those genres just get like discarded as like feminine fluff. Like,
yeah. Well, first off, a lot of female celebrities write actual self-help books. So like Elizabeth Taylor, one of the greatest celebrities of our time. Would you not want a full memoir about her life? Instead, we have a diet book with some anecdotes about her life. And we're like, why did we make this woman write a diet book? And like same with Angela Lansbury. And it's like, oh, this is how you can show worth, show people how you look and like how you got there and like all the horrible things you did to your body, but like we don't care about your life. So I feel like that is one genre. And then I think I just have the premise that all celebrity memoirs are self-help books in some way because they're so messy and sloppy and topical that they always end up relating back to something going on in our own lives. And either they're saying something horrible about it, like Sarah Ferguson. So she's like, you shouldn't approach a man first. And then you have self-help where you're like, oh, that's the standard I won't follow anymore. Or they're like actually helpful, like Jessica Simpson's book.
Yeah. I remember my first celebrity book club Zoom meeting. It was for the Judds. And
God.
I had listened to Winona's book, and you asked, which Judd are you? And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, I think I'm Ashley Judd because I try to keep my distance. And I'm like, yes, these are things that happen to me, but I don't know. I have a really great cat. Do you want to talk about her? But I also know that I am the Winona, and sometimes I also have Naomi moments. And the thing about, you think about a powerhouse like Winona Judd, and the things that she's gone through, and then you go, oh, she has a messy, messy relationship with her mom and sister, just like my relationships with my mom and my sister will get messy, messy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, more than that, Naomi, her mom, who groomed her into the person she is, put it in her will that Winona can't come to the funeral.
On a Post-it note.
Yeah. And you're like, I mean, that is so, and it's funny you say, oh, I'm an Ashley because I have some distance and I'm like, hey, look at my cat. That's actually a Winona trait. So Winona's like, oh, is my husband a pedophile and my mom cut me out of the funeral? That's fine. Should we sing a song? And Ashley is like, we're going to talk about childhood trauma on Oprah.
You're right. I mixed them up the two. And then I am also...
Well, no, they're all layered. They all cross over each other. And my biggest fear is that I'm a Naomi. I'm like, what if I'm actually a Naomi and I don't know?
That's all of our fears. It's like when you're watching And Just Like That and you're like, do I still relate to Miranda? And this is so messy.
No, and just like that, it's new characters. Nothing from the before times remain. These are not the actual women they would have grown to be.
And when it comes to Ashley Judd being like the cycle breaker, I'm also the woman who at Christmas, when my stepmom will ask me, oh my God, why was that allowed to happen? I'll go, because of the rampant, undiagnosed mental illness in our family that just rushes through these veins that I'm only medicated for.
You are the Ashley Judd of your family.
Yeah. And then they just all stare at me and I'm like,
that's fun.
Was that awkward? I'm so sorry.
Worth it though.
So what is it that drew you to celebrity memoirs to begin with?
So my joke / real answer is that my favorite genre of books is celebrity memoirs, which is what happens when your nearest bookstore growing up is a Walmart. So that's both true and it's joking-ish. I was probably like you, deeply in pain as a kid from a lot of things going on that I really didn't understand. I just knew I needed something. I knew something was wrong. And I looked for the answers in books because I loved reading. And I read a lot of books, lived at the library. We had a bunch of like new age things and self-help in our house. And I just like couldn't find the answer. And the first time I found something that really spoke to me was Delta Burke's memoir. And Delta Burke on Designing Women, was told she's just like a fat beast because she was a size 8 and to get out of Hollywood, and then all this stuff. And it was kind of the first time she really spoke about beauty and weight in a way that was so real because I guess we had all witnessed it. Like it had, it was, her weight was headlines on, it wasn't Us Weekly, like People magazine and stuff. So it was just so real. And it was exactly how I was feeling about weight and beauty in high school and all my eating disorder stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be in entertainment. I want to be an actress. I want to be a writer. Like I should read these fucking books. Cause also in them, they'd be like, and here's how I got an agent and here's what Hollywood is like. And they were so fun. And I also think trauma and hard things are like really hard to discuss. But if you're also discussing like how Delta Burke like met her first husband and like how to wear leggings, like your brain can like read it easier, There are so many times where I'm sitting in front of my own therapist and I'll be like, hey, do you know what Whitney Cummings wrote in her book one time? And she'll be like, yeah. And I was like, well, that made me think about whether or not I should be honest with you about my like
low-key disordered eating that I've chosen to hide from you for 6 years. And she's like, okay.
Also, like, that's the most helpful Whitney Cummings has been in a decade. That moment right there.
She saved my birthday one year because I got to meet her. So, she got twice.
Okay. I love that.
But yeah, because I love female stand-up comedy. And to me, like, I fall in love with their comedy first and then I read their books. So I can't wait for Taylor Tomlinson to like get to the age where she's like, I want to write a book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I'll listen to their acts and then I'll just like feel like that is also trauma I have endured. And now I know how to make it funny. So my therapist laughs while I cry about it.
I love that. Also, I hope, female comedians, also my favorite subsect of this genre, and I never discuss them because I'm just too close to the world, but like I love the ones that like really give you the book, whereas some people just reprint their set, which is also funny, but you're like, go harder. It's memoir. You got to give it.
You have to give us like the background of the bit, because there are so many bits that I can do verbatim. Taylor Tomlinson's like absentee Father's Day bit, I can do verbatim.
That's awesome.
So my celebrity memoirs that I would consume to try to make myself feel better are so lame, and they just came to the surface of my brain while you were talking. Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yeah, I read all those.
I read all of them. Was I an elderly woman in her 70s? No. Did I read all of their stories? Yes.
Were you a hardcore Christian? I don't think I realized at the age I was reading them that they're like indoctrinations for religion.
I wasn't. It's so weird. We have an episode that ended up being accidentally about religious trauma because my family wasn't. We were very like lackadaisical Catholics. Like I knew we were like raised Catholic, and I knew that like Catholicism was like a thing and you got a cracker, but it wasn't like we were talking about it every day.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I was like, wait, my very low level like relationship with Catholicism and the way that my family would play it out made me like really shut off to things that are non-Catholic, and probably chicken noodle soup was one of those things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, they have so much. I just never realized it was like become Christian books that we were reading.
I know. It's like when you look back at old Seventh Heaven episodes and you're like,
yeah,
I let this be in my brain.
No, completely. There's so many things like that for me.
So when you became like a grown-up who was owning her identity and was like, I read celebrity memoirs and this is the best, were you teased?
Not at all, which is like also just such a like, wow, like why did I keep this myself so many years? Because one, I think culturally just times had changed. Two, we're talking about 3 years ago. So I mean, I was very grown. I was just like fully across the finish line by the time I got to this point. And then also the response was mostly, oh my God, I didn't realize these books had value. I didn't realize they were good in any way until you started posting about it on Instagram. Or the response was, I secretly love these books too.
That's amazing. I love it. Because I think when people are more honest about their hobbies and what their hobbies mean to them, I think someone always in the room goes, yeah, me too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is like a rule by now.
Yeah, we have a fellow cookie, and I won't drop names in case this is like their secret hobby, who also does like RPG and TT, like tabletop games. And I've shared logins to one of my streaming services that does live plays. And I was like, we should watch this together. They have a whole campaign that's drag queens this season.
Oh, I love that. Also, you're getting the word out now. That sounds fucking awesome.
It's Jujubee and Bob the drag queen and Alexa Thunder Cunt and Monet Exchange. Those are the players.
That's fucking awesome. Yeah, that sounds incredible.
So Jessica Simpson, I'm working my way backwards in Celebrity Book Club and the Patreon, so I haven't reached Jessica yet. Tell me some of the ways that her book is actually helpful compared to this is a self-help book on how to be a lady, Angela Lansbury style.
Right. Well, I would say, like, one, we always learn better through stories. And the thing that Jessica has going for her is that if you are, I'm not say Gen Z too, but mostly millennial and up, she has these cultural touch points in all of our lives, whether you are a fan or not. Like, we all remember her being booed out of the stadium with Tony Romo. We all remember her wearing John Mayer pashmina scarves. We all remember her being called fat. And her early marriage with Nick Lachey in like one of the first like big reality shows. So you have all these things that formed our culture. And then in her book, you get to see how wrong we and everyone were about all of them, because her side of the story, literally you're podcasting, women's stories weren't, her story wasn't being told. And so we learned these things wrong. Like when she was called fat and we all learned that she was fat, she was actually a size 4. And if you go back and look at the photos, it's just very clearly a very physically small person who we all believed was fat and then believed that about ourselves. There's now, people are just picking up on this now. They're like making memes about it. They're talking about this Jessica Simpson moment. But she told us 3 years ago on the podcast, you can hear me and my guests be like, go look at the photos. You're going to like break your own mental visual history of how the world works. With John Mayer, it's like such a toxic, manipulative fuckboy on high relationship. And reading it back, like she was so made fun of for that. And she was made fun of for Tony Romo. And you just realize she was just trying to move on from John Mayer, who was still like showering at her parents' house, to stay in her life, like just crazy shit. And so, oh my God, how he would like sabotage her right before she would sing before the president. And so those are the ways where you're like, oh, we're going to like rethink toxic relationships, and not just currently, but like how we learned them in the 2000s. What is more helpful?
John Mayer is one of my arch nemesis because I am a Swiftie, and I did make a TikTok that was bullying him when Speak Now was re-released because I was like, this is my right as a woman.
Yeah. I mean, it is, you know, the things he said about Jessica Simpson in that, I believe it was Rolling Stone. He also like says he's not sexually attracted to Black women. He says the N-word. How this man is still trekking is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Also, you have to listen to our Ricky Lake episode. I mean, you don't have to. I'll tell you right now. She has the exact same story about John Mayer.
I have. Yeah.
And these women are like 10 years apart.
Because my mother loved to parallel play with me by having me do an activity and watch 90s like talk shows. So I love Ricky Lake and I love Jenny Jones. John Mayer, because you kind of made my next point where it's like John Mayer didn't have to write a book for us to forgive him for being John Mayer. Jessica Simpson had to sit down and relive her trauma and write a book. Taylor Swift had to sit down and relive her trauma and write a song for us to believe that maybe John Mayer wasn't great to them in their relationships. But at large, everyone was just like, I mean, he told women that their bodies were a wonderland. He can't be that bad of a guy.
Oh, completely. Or if he is, we don't care and we don't need to hear about it. I mean, we forgave Jake Gyllenhaal for doing a photo shoot with a red scarf. Like, and forgive just meaning like we let them pass through society as is. And yeah, it's such a good point because we do it to everyone in our daily lives. Like, I find myself having to do it. Like, when you're question about anything, you have to like bleed out in order to prove your worth to people or that your suffering matters.
Yeah. I think that is really prevalent with Elliot Page's current book, Page Boy.
Yeah.
Because I'm on two sides of the coin where I loved it and I loved listening to it. And I went in going in knowing that my only goal for this book was to like gather my thoughts around the intense empathy I was feeling for Elliot Page. And then other people were like, I heard it's a bummer summer. And I was like, yeah.
Well, they're not wrong.
Like, well, it turns out that being a trans man in America is a bummer. It's a bummer.
Yeah. You know, the only thing I'll give to them, because I am the same with you, the thing I'll give to them is that it's not well structured as a book. And so the storytelling, I think if there was some really cohesive structure to the book, you would be like, whoa, bummer summer on high. That was fucking nuts. And I feel so much. Instead, when it sort of feels like a dirge of stories that kind of like wobble around, then I think people say that more. They're like, oh, I was just sad versus like I was moved.
Yeah.
I want to yell at the book editor. I don't know who they are, but let's yell.
I completely agree with you. So one of my superpowers is I live outside of time. So
Just like Mariah Carey.
Yeah. It took you saying on your podcast that the book didn't follow a linear fashion that I sat there and I was like, oh, I guess it didn't. And I just decided I live outside of time. Time has no reference points with me. So I was just like, oh yeah, it's just a group of stories, of experiences.
Well, I think even more than that, like, because like non-linear is actually, I think, a better memoir structure. More than that, it's like you like 3 stories within one chapter, then you're going to revisit a different side of the story in another chapter. Also, we're not going to let you know we've changed our age. Like the last chapter, you don't know till 4 pages in. They're 16 in that story. You know, he's 16 versus you go in thinking he's the age he is in the last chapter. Like,
yeah.
But I think living outside of time is a better life. So
Thank you. It makes me radically irresponsible is what just ends up happening.
Mariah Carey doesn't believe in time either. You know, 2 icons.
Me and Mariah. You are constantly telling me how I am the same as female celebrities. One time you were talking about, it was Pam Anderson, about how an ex was like, I'll just buy you a house. And I was like, I've had that happen.
Yeah, that's wild.
It was never fruition, but I did have a man manipulate me before we were dating by being like, and when we're living together and I'm just going to buy this house and you'll finish school and we'll have a dog. And I love dogs. And I recently looked through old Facebook messages that we had exchanged. And I was like, why didn't I ever put in all caps while he was telling me, like, you can't just text me all the time. That's rude. And no one wants to hear from a girl that much. Where is my dog? Like, I should have just put in all caps, where is my puppy I was promised?
Where is my puppy? Here's a house link. Down payment ready.
Like,
what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? You went from literally telling me I was the most important person ever to being like, why are you contacting me today? The whiplash.
Where's that man now?
He still very much lives in the area that I grew up. And
fun for a fun visit home.
Yeah, he's a fun visit home.
Tag him in this podcast.
That is one of my favorite things that you'll say on the podcast when you're like, drop a name.
Full name. And you know what? Everyone's always welcome to. Full name. Yeah.
Drop a name.
If the crime is bad enough, full name and address.
Full name and address. Social security number. Gen Z will find you.
If you have it. Yeah.
Speaking about dropping full names, do you think that when memoirs drop full names, or at least give us enough evidence that we're like, I know exactly who this is, Red Scarf Jake Gyllenhaal in All Too Well, do you think that that is cathartic for someone? Do you think that that's like, because when I started this podcast, I told myself, I'm not going to use names that gives them ammo to come back into my life. I do not want them back into my life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, in memoir too, not so much with songs, although it could definitely happen with songs. You're dealing with like legal and what's defamatory and what do you have the rights to say? What is something that like someone would have to go to that person, get sign off to include them in? So sometimes I think the decisions are just like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to prove this in court, so they could say it's defamatory, so I have to take the name out, but I'll kind of let you know who it is, but I wish I could say who it was. And then, yeah, when Elliot didn't list the name of the asshole at the party, even though there's multiple witnesses, it's really tough because like one time I'm going somewhere with this, maybe, I don't know. One time I had this girl DM me. I was having so much fun doing wedding stuff, and then she DM'd me like, no one fucking cares about your wedding dress. Shut the fuck up, right?
Drop her full name and handle.
Well, so here's the thing. So I was like, and by the way, like I had only gotten just so many messages of like, this is so fun. It's why I kept going. But in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I'm a fucking bridal monster. So she sent me this DM. By the way, she kept saying like, I'm going to unfollow you. And she just like kept DMing me. And I was like, bam. Oh, and then she was like, my wedding dress was so expensive and you don't hear me telling people about it. I'm like, you just told me about it. Also, I'm saying mine are cheap, but whatever. So I did post the DM because I was like, so like, oh, I was just hurt. But I blocked her name out because I know this is just some random lady. She was a hairstylist in the Northwest, if you know her. But she, random lady. And I have like a bunch of like book club people I talk to have a much bigger platform. If I post this, people are going to go put her in line. And just because she caused me so much harm, I don't want to like it's a little bit of abuse of power to like do that to her. Like I would have to know what I'm doing. And my line is just a little higher. Like you would have to be like, I am a racist or I'm a homophobe in my community. And then I would probably like drop a full handle. But I actually had it done to me once too, where this, again, with wedding stuff. Oh, it makes me so upset when I think about it. But basically I was like going through a wedding magazine, and you know, weddings are like normcore, traditional, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormative bullshit. I thought they were fair game to make fun of. And I picked up this wedding magazine, and it was the best wedding magazine I'd ever read. Truly. I was like, oh my God, this one's like finally cool. But I like made fun of some of the stuff in it. Like someone had a bouquet that was just literally looked like a bush. And not like a small bush, but just a giant bush. And they were like, I'm going to carry this giant bush down the aisle. And I was like, anyway, so I made some jokes about it. Turns out that magazine editor was sent my jokes. I had no idea. I wasn't thinking like that. I was thinking this was like, you know, Vogue weddings, New York Times vows. Like we all make fun of it. And she posted my stories without context and made it look like I was being cruel to her.
Yeah.
And that I wanted to take her magazine down, and her follower, like I just woke up one morning and I just had these messages being like, you're so fucking ugly. I hope you die. Like, I hope you have the worst wedding in history. I hope your husband leaves you. So intense, because she had sent them to yell at me. And I just remember thinking like, this is so wild. Like in the name of me bullying you, you have sent people to do so much worse to me. And I never even, if I had been like, look at this magazine editor, what a dumb bitch, isn't she so stupid? Like, yeah, okay, send people for me, but like, I just thought we were talking about weddings. I thought that was acceptable. And I was also making jokes, and a lot of them were really positive. And yeah, and then I just got totally brutalized.
Number one, it is very well known within my circle on the podcast, in my content, that I do not want to get married for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons.
Your wedding, I was like, oh, but I could make it fun. Because to me, like, weddings are the least fun. They're just
they're not fun to attend either.
No.
Not all. I mean, sometimes I love it when they're good, but they're not always fun to go to.
But your wedding, I was glued to your Instagram stories. I was like, what's Chelsea doing for the wedding today? And I'm like, no, don't pick those place cards. Except for you and I have such really like similar tastes that every time you're like, should I put this bird chandelier up here? I'm like, yeah, get 4. You need 4.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's really interesting that was an interesting time, because weddings are it's such a sensitive cultural item that people bring a lot of baggage to. So even me posting like, this dress is dumb, right? Somewhere across the world, someone could be like, fuck you, you don't respect weddings, you know, and you've ruined my special day. And I'm like, me? Like, what? I'm just trying to like turn these norms on their head a little bit, and I'm doing it very lighthearted. But yeah, weddings will fuck you up. It'll fuck everyone up. It was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, you really learn how people feel about you, themselves, and others during wedding planning.
Oh my God, yes. Underline that 3 times.
But let's go through the greatest hits of misogyny that we've noticed in female celebrity memoirs. Number 1, the husbanders, the managers who are also your husband.
Yes, who bring nothing to the table besides telling you, talented woman, what to do and leeching off your resources and usually divorcing you.
Yes. And I think what helps me gather perspective and empathy about celebrity as a whole is that memoirs make me realize that just because you got to be on the Billboard 500 or an Oscar winner or whatever doesn't mean that you can't be had by a man or a person with bad intentions.
Oh my God. If anything, it means you're more susceptible. I also think sometimes people are like, why are you like so fucking nice to these stupid celebrities? And like, all I can think is like, Natalie, if your podcast gets fucking huge, you're a celebrity. You write a book after that, now you're a celebrity memoir. Like, should we all be like, Natalie's a bitch. She's so stupid. Can you believe she fucking wrote this? Can you believe she almost fell for a man who bought her a house and she didn't get a dog? She's a fucking idiot. It's like, I hate to be like, there's still people too, but more than that, if you're talking about them, like on a podcast or something, like you are also in the realm of being public. Like, are we not still people? And some of those celebrities, yeah, they're very stupid, but a lot of them are just like, a woman with more things, that means a man wants to fuck her up even more.
Yeah. And I think that my go-to is, I am sad that that woman who I admire, who I find to be talented and thought was, quote unquote, like, my go-to in therapy is always, I should have known. I know this. I know the patterns, and I'm smarter than this. Yeah. And I will project that onto people I admire. And so now my go-to is to tell people, I'm just so sad that internalized misogyny still has her too.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful way to say it. And also, like, I mean, I think you do lose some touch with reality the more famous you get. And I think the circle of people who you trust and how to gain your trust gets really fucking weird. So you're no longer playing in like the normal circle of red flags. So it's like, where do you learn the information? I mean, think about like Britney Spears. Obviously, a lot of factors go into that, but like a fucking paparazzi was getting her Starbucks order and opening her door for her and telling people to leave her alone. And no one else in her fucking life was doing that.
No.
So she dated him. So he became her boyfriend. Do you know what I mean? Simply by being like, can you let her in the car, please? Because you had no one else to do that. Like, I think when your world gets so small and so messed up, like, you do lose track of like what is decent, and also the people allowed around you is like usually really shitty people too.
Yeah. I went to El King at a small club in Cincinnati to go watch her play music, and apparently El King grew up in Ohio somewhere, or her family did, or whatever. And the radio DJ opened the show by going like, hey, is any of Elle's family in the crowd? We know that some of you live here. Crickets. And then I went to cheer, and my friend went, what are you doing? And I went, I am very confident that this will also happen to me one day. So I don't know, maybe we cheer so she thinks that a cousin came.
I love that. Did you?
No. I was like,
I think that's, I mean, also you just, it's just so weird and complicated. You never know when they're like, I don't want to be known as Elle King's cousin. I just want to support my cousin, but like, don't look at me, and then they say nothing. And then she's like, you've humiliated me.
You've humiliated me. That was cruel. I go, I fully expect to be thanking someone during some sort of an award speech, and the seat I had reserved be empty. So.
Equally empty. That's so funny. I mean, even with my book, like, some people in the book are like, please put my real name in. Like, oh my God. And other people are like, I'll be taking a fake name, please. And not for any other reason other than like, I didn't ask for book attention like you did.
So I kept the podcast a secret from my family until I realized that I was really passionate about it. And then I got indignant about the fact that I never get to be proud of anything that I do. So we were at Gen Con, which is a gaming convention. And I just brought it up. And my father, I understand where the question came from, but my father went, you're not talking about me, are you? While you named a show that. And I'm like, I don't know. Am I?
I don't know. Better listen and support, like and subscribe.
And now that we're like a couple years in, he'll be like, I don't this is everyone in my family's line to me. I just don't understand it, but I guess you're going to do it. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, good. That's all you need.
Yeah. That's all I want.
That's pass enough.
That's all I ever wanted for Britney Spears was for someone to be like, Britney, we're just going to let you do it.
Yeah. We're going to let you have a cell phone.
Yeah. And I think the opposite, well, not the opposite, the partner of the husbander is when your father is like, oh, I haven't raised you well enough to think that you could handle money or your mortgage or anything. So let me just be in charge of that. Whitney Houston.
Oh, yeah. Whitney Houston, Britney Spears, Dionne Warwick. Like, yeah.
Did you see the Whitney Spears?
I mean, what a drag name, though.
I'm going to write that down. The Whitney Houston movie that came out a couple of Christmas. You're the
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
I know, we're the only people in the world who watched it.
And
it's incredible.
Yeah, and and I've had people tell me, you're the only person who ever brings that movie up. And I'm like, well, it's beautiful.
Same.
Go watch it.
Yeah, also it's one of the only, if the only, like film about her life, and there's been many, that includes the fact that she was a queer woman.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't even care. They were like, oh.
Yeah. So at the end of it, the lights come on. I turn to my two young friends and I look at them and I go, and ladies, what did we learn from the Whitney Houston movie?
And what'd they say?
They're like, I'm sure it's you can't trust your father or your man. And I'm like, and don't put them on your paperwork. Don't let them look at your money. Like, I just give these, like,
always
lectures.
Have your own account. Absolutely.
I go, and now we know that Whitney Houston's father killed her. Like, I was like, that is the line I have drawn.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for you. Teach the youth.
Thank you. I try so hard. I'm trying to think of what the other, besides the rampant, I now have to write a book about the body shaming that I went through when I, in turn, actually was underweight or going through disordered eating or
unbearable.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's so sad how often I now look back on pictures where I can remember doing horrible things to my body and thinking horrible things about my body. And you look at that photo and you're like, that is so sad that was happening to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not that there's not really any way I could look where I look back and go, now it wasn't valid. Like, none of it was, no matter what, it's like you never needed to do that. But like when you go back and see this like young smiling face and like know what she was going through, it's painful.
It is. And it's something where you're like, you know that they know. And especially in the digital age with online, it's like, you know that they know that you've posted that and it's awful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, the online age just changes everything.
Yeah. I started putting stuff that I was putting on TikTok on YouTube also. And I'm like, oh, YouTube be mean and angry at me all the time.
Which is wild because TikTok is also a pretty brutal place, but YouTube is worse.
Yeah, YouTube is worse. Men be so pressed that I liken Taylor Swift songs to themes I talk about in the podcast. They're like, what does this have to do with Taylor Swift? I go, I put it in the caption.
So what are you doing here?
Move on. And I was talking about that the other day. There's this new weird TikTok trend where people are acting like AI. Have you seen it?
No.
So people are acting like robots, and then they're like only reacting if you give them a gift. So if you give them like the chili pepper, they're like, ooh, spicy. And if you give them the rose, they're like, oh, smells nice. And they're talking in sim voice. And I was like, people are so pressed about it. And they're pressed enough that instead of still scrolling, they'll tell you like, you're dumb. What a dumb way to make money. What a stupid way to trick us out of our money. I was like,
yeah, because they're sad that they're going to work and not sitting there accepting chili emojis.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm taking notes and I'm like, I can make the sim voice. I've done that my entire life.
Yeah, exactly. New business venture for me.
Let's talk about your memoir because I'm so excited for it.
Yeah.
When you were writing your memoir, were there any like memoir lessons that you learned from what you have been reading? Like, I'm definitely going to do this, but I'm definitely not going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, definitely every story has to have a beginning, middle, and end, or don't tell the story. And like no scene painting, no paragraph long scene paintings. You can paint the scene that you're telling it, but like don't take like I was never gonna be like, and my childhood bedroom looked like this, and our kitchen looked like this, and our meals we ate were this, and my mom was like this, and my dad smelled like this. All of them are always like my dad bent down to hug me and he smelled like, and they describe how daddy smells. I'm like, well, one, I don't have a dad to describe, but two, if I did, it wouldn't do that. I definitely looked a lot at the structure of it too, where I feel like I really tried to structure it so that the piece as a whole is telling a story, but also that like I never want to start in someone's childhood, almost never. And so I also made a concerted effort to make sure we did not start in mine as well.
Yeah, I think that's always really tough too, because it's it's like, do I want to know what happened to Marilyn Monroe to lead her here? Or do I just want to know about Marilyn Monroe right before she got big or something like that?
Yeah. And I want to know the childhood stuff that really matters and played a role in your life. Whereas I feel like most often people are just like, let me just tell you my whole childhood. And you're like, they actually don't do that. But tell me the parts that mattered, and that rarely happens unless the childhood is coming later in the book and you can like connect it to something.
One of my favorite episodes of Glamorous Trash, your bonus episodes where you talk about things that aren't books but matter to you, is the one where you were like, The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and that entire franchise are our milestone points of where we are as a society, because I've been saying that for years. I'm like,
yeah.
This is how all of America feels. You just have to read the comments on Rachel Lindsay's post. Like,
1000%. Exactly.
do you feel like any of the things that you were feeling about our current society temperatures did you do a deep dive on the memoir, or were you like, oh, I'm really surprised that this actually affected me so soon or in this part of my life or anything? Like when I accidentally found out I had religious trauma, I was like, just like live on my podcast. I was like, oh.
Yeah, there was definitely things I was writing about where I had some very new trauma come up because I did not realize there was trauma there until I had to write about it. I mean, it's a really beautiful way to heal if you are an artist and creative and you have therapy support, because otherwise it can ruin your life. But it's a beautiful way to heal because you have a book editor there being like, wait, this makes no fucking sense. What do you mean? And then you have to be like, oh, it's because, and then you're like, oh my God, or it's like, hey, why is this important person just missing from this story? Like, why are you not telling me what they were doing at that time? And you're like, oh, because they don't want to. And then you're like, why? And then all of a sudden now you're like going through it again. And so they really can like point out things in your story that you think you are fine with, but when shown to someone else can pull threads that lead to something like very deep.
So this show didn't start out being your weekly look at everyday misogyny. It actually started out as me practicing my comedy bits about my exes on a podcast during the quarantine.
I love that.
Because I was unemployed. But as I started to reflect and write these outlines and tell these stories, I realized, I was like, I know that like the Me Too movement and the patriarchy and misogyny and capitalistic greed, these are very broad terms that I was like, oh yeah, that's affected me. But I never knew it affected me this way. I never knew that I was actually carrying that into every relationship. I never knew that I was so ready to endure men making fun of me or my partner's not like actually celebrating who I am, but dogging who I am in public because it made them feel stronger or things like that. Because it's something that I've been told, like, no, that's what we do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's wild how the brain works like that, and like how trauma, which is, I know is a buzzword, but it is also a science word, and the science way trauma, how it works like that, and how interesting it can be to think you know something and then what it takes to actually process it and know it for real.
Yeah. And when I was laid off from my job because of COVID, I was still a person who was telling everyone every day, no, it's my dream job. I get to work in theater. Every day I'm talking to people who make musicals, make theater, make this thing that I love. And then you're sitting alone waiting to be called back to the theater and you're like, wait a minute, is that really how I let my boss talk to me? Is that how I really allowed myself to just be talked over, to sit in meetings and have my work be taken advantage of or be given props to someone else for it? I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. I thought I was above that, but okay.
We're still learning it. Listen, I learned some of the same lessons every goddamn day.
Well, and I can't imagine, because being a funny woman is something that's gotten me so far in life, but it's also cost me like so many relationships or friendships or whatever, because people are so threatened by funny women. And that's your job. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it definitely comes with a lot of emotional baggage, but the cool thing about comedy is that as long as you're funnier than them, you still win.
Yeah, I love that. As long as you're funny, you need to put it on a t-shirt.
Right across the tits.
Right across the tits, or on a mug that you can read to yourself every day. Like, yeah, as long as I'm still funnier than them, I win.
Well, I mean, that's also just like when you're in a writer's room and maybe there's something like dated or fucked up or like whatever happening, like to be the person who is like, actually that's white supremacy or that's misogyny is like, that's not gonna get you cred with the other writers. Two, your intention, which is to change it and make it better, that's not fucking happening from that. You're in a comedy room. So what you do is outright it. You have to write a better joke than what is currently presented. You have to think of a better idea than what is currently presented, and you have to pitch it in a way that gets the response where they choose that idea and not the dated, dusty one. And that's really, really difficult to do, especially when we don't all share the same comedic taste of what is funny.
You just imparted me and probably so many other people right now a life lesson, because I've told you this before. I am the woman in the room who will sit there and be like, your boyfriend is a misogynist, just so you know. And then I just like go and get my drink and leave you to think about your choices.
Yeah, but it's tough though. It's tough the way people want to hear information. And like, if the goal is to really change people and get them information, you have to deliver it in the way that people want. You can't just deliver it and think that you've done a good job.
I also saw on your Instagram this week, you were with people in your DMs talking about the idea of oversharing. I was wondering if you wanted like a free space to talk about this idea of oversharing and what you've like learned from the DMs. I saw a lot of people agreeing with me, being like, oversharing is what we tell women they're doing when they're talking about things that have happened to them that no one wants to think about.
Totally. I think I have a possibly complicated take on this, because I do think that headline is correct. Like, you're sharing too much, the genre of memoir, oversharing. It's just like a very female thing. And it's a way to tell you to like, shut up. Your books don't matter. Your stories don't matter. Like, shut up. At the same time, I often can tell when I like, and I've spoken about it on the podcast, but I have CPTSD, and I can usually tell when I am with someone who is suffering from similar levels of trauma or similar psychosis. And one of sort of the initial things that can happen is you just can't stop talking about it. And it's not like a choice. It's like a mental, like you're overflowing. Like, you cannot keep the lid on this thing. And so I think like in one way, like that is, sometimes people are like, you're oversharing. And we're like, it's like, that's a person who's like in trouble and they're calling out for help. I know from doing years of trauma therapy that if you do not share in I don't want to say correct way, I don't know another word for it, but there's a way in which you share reharms yourself. And simply, like, if something horrible happens and then you just walk out and you're like, I'm gonna fucking tell everybody, like, possibly, I hope that could go great. There are also worlds where like that is very damaging to your own health. Like, fuck everyone else. And I think so I do think that there's really specific ways or tools when you are sharing that can make sure like you remain safe and you're not you don't re-traumatize yourself. You're not sharing with an unsafe source. That's social media often. Like, if you need to share and you're not in a processed place and you share in a place that's unsafe and get feedback, like social media or a friend who's shitty or whatever, like that can like set your own healing back. And I think the last thing is that I really think about, especially online, is like the intention of the sharing and what we're looking for from it. And like, are you sharing to share your story? Are you sharing to shame someone? And if you are sharing to shame someone, you have to think about rehabilitation, because what is the point? Unless it's a crime. If it's a crime, go to court. Get called the cops. We got to go to court. We got to get crimes. All should be persecuted. But if you were like, this person did this behavior and should be shamed for it, within that plan, you should have a rehabilitation. So how do we want them to change, to make it better, to make reparations? Whereas I don't think we go that far. You just go like, shame them. And that can lead to worse consequences for you, for them, for the world, for culture. Like it. So anyways, I just think that, especially with social media, like just sharing has to be really thoughtful for everyone involved. That being said, women are always told to shut up.
Yeah. Well, and so Julia and I will talk about that just kind of organically while we're looking at past media or when we're talking on either one of our shows. And it'll be like, people love the awareness stage. They love to like sit in the like, yes, I know that childbirth mortality affects women of color way more than anyone else in the country. And I'm going to scream it because I'm aware. And then people are like, yes, I'm aware too. And now I get to stop. And it's like, oh,
Right.
no.
No, no, we're at the beginning.
We're at the beginning. The awareness isn't where we stop. Or it's like, yeah, it's just, now I'm aware of it. So now I get to stop. And so many people I know it's the scarier step because the next step is, how did I play into the system that caused that bad thing to happen? And because I can only affect
and what
myself.
now?
Yeah, and what now? Because I can truly only change my actions or talk to people about my actions. That's so well put.
Yeah. It's like such a beautiful world where we get to hear more women's stories and share, and then it opens us up to all these other, and not even just women, like minorities, all these stories that we just never got a voice, but there's just so much more to be done besides just sharing.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the ending phase of the show because you've been fantastic, and I want your time to be spent on your Friday doing so many more talented and amazing things. We end every episode with a manifestation and a takeaway. So our takeaway, I've likened it to, if you were going to embroider something and pass it on to someone, like, this is the lesson. I want you to look at every day. When it comes to writing your own memoir or reading female memoirs or doing celebrity book club in itself, what is your big takeaway from that? And then we have to move forward in joy. So what do you hope for the collective energy from that point?
What a beautifully deep moving podcast, Natalie. Okay, so I just, you might have seen this on my Instagram stories, and then I literally made a video about it this morning, but it's something I've really been thinking about. It's something that I think my podcast talks about without naming it, and yours as well. And I read this quote, and I want to read it. So it's from Elizabeth Wurtzel, who wrote Prozac Nation, which is a beloved memoir. And she said, "Men who make the rules tend to dismiss memoir because they're just not as good at it as women are. Their capacity to be truthful is limited by the fact that they're the ones with power. And it's not useful if you are the ones with power to tell the truth about yourself."
Yeah.
So that is my takeaway of how you read memoir, and also how you write your own memoir and process women's stories.
That's so funny. My takeaway was going to be, if someone has told you that your story isn't important, that means that it's important to so many people you haven't met yet.
Beautiful takeaway. I love that.
What are you hoping for the general collection moving forward? The big manifestation of it all.
The big manifestation of Memoirs and Women's Stories. I am hoping that we get to have some more fucking fun soon. Because we've been doing a lot of fucking work and bleeding out and sharing and vulnerability. And I just hope that we start to reap some rewards soon, and just little more bits of joy and fun and comedy. I hope we get some more fucking shows starring women with real stories that get to be funny and not. And that's what I hope all of this has brought about. And a really specific one. Stop fucking television people. Stop taking these memoirs and telling the wrong story from them. As you may have noticed, we never got the Jessica Simpson Amazon show based on her book. I read the scripts. They took none of the stories anyone cared about and made the worst show from it. And thankfully they didn't pick it up. But it's I know they passed on Paris Hilton's. You guys, start giving us some good TV shows based on these memoirs.
Please.
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 We're out here watching, and just like that, season 2, give us some television.
The things that I could say about the writing that is happening on And Just Like That season 2, where all of a sudden one theme of an entire episode was, wow, New York, not the same as it used to be.
Yep.
I was that's the entire episode.
It's so funny.
I think my manifestation is, I'm going to get so specific because I feel like she needs all of the good love and energy in the world. I hope that whatever Britney Spears' memoir is going to be, that we all accept it with open hearts and empathy because she went to hell and back to write it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And you know what? We'll carry the torch for that sentiment.
We will, because I worry about Britney.
We're all worried about Britney. We're all worried about Britney. But you know what? This is what it looks like when you put a grown woman in a conservatorship and abuse her. Mm-hmm. So now she gets to spin and twirl and do whatever the fuck she wants, and we're all going to support it as she heals.
My sister's favorite is when there's just a tiny little seashell on her Pikachu or her nipples, and she's like, do it, Britney. You put that little tiny seashell wherever you want it to be. Chelsea, I knew I was going to have so much fun today because you and the other cookies are just people that I always crave more time with. So
that's how I feel.
Thank you so much for the gift.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Tell everyone all about you and where they can find you so they know when your memoir is coming out and when episodes of Celebrity Book Club drop.
Yeah, go follow me at Chelsea Devantis on TikTok. Apparently on Instagram is where I do most of the digital book clubs. We have a Patreon, and then the podcast is, avail wherever you're listening to this podcast called Celebrity Book Club with Chelsea Devantis.
With Chelsea Devantis. And become a cookie.
Become a cookie. We have a live book club that I met Natalie through.
Yes. And this is going to feel like I'm bragging myself, but I've never been in a group of people who are more talented, kind, creative, thought-provoking, all of it.
That's how I feel. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so special. No, don't join it unless you're one of those people. You hear me?
Chelsea has sat in a room with Jon Stewart, and she's talking to us about the cookies like that.
But we're all at that level, and don't fucking get near my Patreon if you're not.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to text my aunt. Like, someone may have said that a group I'm a part of, to the level of being in a room with Jon Stewart. She'll die. She'll die.
Say hey to your aunt for me.
Tolerators, you know the drill. It's Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram. That's the link. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on Patreon. And there was a handy dandy little ad at some point during this episode where I go into more details on that. So remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including having a story that would change the world and being told that no one wants to hear it. Smiles are for joy.